Good morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. What a fun weekend. We find out who Georgia's playing in the NCAA tournament. You got the thriller with the Diamond Dawgs on Sunday that has to be discussed. One of the best moments involving a Georgia team we've seen in some time, and it'll get less attention than something related to football, but it's hard to be more entertaining than that was. And obviously Georgia starts spring practice this week too. So we are jam-packed on all of it. I love this time of year. Obviously the weather today is miserable, but nonetheless, when you got all these things happening at once, it is a very good time to be a Georgia Bulldogs fan. So we will try to reflect that mood here on the show today, talking about all of it, and backed by popular demand, your chance to be involved with all the proceedings this week, at least as it relates to the NCAA tournament. We'll give you more details on that too. Glad to have you with us for it all. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. And it begins right now.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I am prone to hyperbole, I acknowledge that, and yet I feel pretty comfortable in saying that what happened for Georgia and its baseball team on Sunday is one of the most thrilling conclusions to a game you're ever going to see, and it went completely viral. I'm talking about absolutely everywhere last night, so of course we will talk about that in a moment. Just an unbelievable thing. Several takeaways from that. We'll give that to you here coming up in just a little bit. Let me, though, instead, because we obviously the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, got to talk Georgia football here for a moment with spring practice beginning this week. And on Friday's show, we gave you some of the big questions as it relates to Georgia ahead of spring practice. And for a couple of minutes here before we get to some of the other things going on, including where Georgia lands in the NCAA tournament for basketball starting on Thursday night, I want to focus on the Georgia football spring practice in terms of the mood around the program here right now. I've told you the last few days, last couple of weeks, that I'm pretty optimistic about Georgia right now. Now, generally, I think I'm an optimistic person, and conventionally, Georgia gives you a lot of reason for optimism. It's a very successful program. They're very well resourced. They begin every year, and we expect them to begin every year for the foreseeable future, right there in the middle of the most relevant conversation when it comes to who could have success in college football. So it's not breaking news necessarily to say that I'm optimistic, but when you look at some of the, what Georgia was able to hold on to, how some of the incoming freshmen sprinkle in and provide opportunities for Georgia, the various, the overall profile of Georgia as a team right now, yeah, I feel pretty good about what I think that Georgia can do this season and have reason to believe that this team in 2026 could be better than the last handful of teams that Georgia has had and come a little closer to achieving what we believe Georgia's end-of-season expectations justifiably are. So that is the, I think, mood around the Georgia program right now. And because I'm curious about this sort of thing, I went back and looked, what did Kirby Smart say last year? Tomorrow we expect to hear from Kirby Smart. This week we'll get a chance to have his perspective on where the team is. And I do think it becomes an interesting comparison year over year, things that were said last year compared to things that are maybe being said right now. And if you want to see how Kirby himself tries to set the tone for his team, I think looking back to what he said almost exactly this time a year ago, Georgia actually started a little sooner than it is right now. But when you go back and look at this, what Kirby said to set the tone for last year's spring practice, I think it gives you a little bit of an interesting window into what we might hear this week. So let's start with this. The question is related to how do you improve? How do you year over year get better as a team? And there's one small part of a larger answer that I think was an interesting tone setter for Georgia a year ago. And I think it'll be an interesting contrast to see how much of this kind of language also gets used this year too, around the notion that, well, how much improvement do we even really need from the perspective of a fan compared to his perspective as a coach? This was, I think, in context, pretty compelling from a year ago, and I think it's an important preview of what we might also hear this week. This is Kirby Smart from last year.
you do it every year, regardless of the year. I'm sure the outside world thinks if you win every game or you win a national championship or you lose every game that the sky's falling or, everything's hunky-dory. For us, it's always an approach of how do we get better? How do we improve? The first way to do that is through recruiting, through the transfer portal, through talent acquisition. The next is through looking at other things people do.
So Kirby Smart says, I think 3 things there I want to pull apart just for a moment. First of all, he's like, well, when it comes to improvement, the outside world thinks this, ... the unspoken context being compared to what I, as the leader of the organization, think. And I'm sure Kirby knows this, but it's worth saying out loud. In terms of defining what the actual truth is, the opinion of the outside world, even though Kirby would rightly so say, well, they're less informed than I am, and they are, I am less informed than someone like Kirby who's deep in it. Even if that's the case, the outside world defines the truth more so than the person at the center of it. So when Kirby says, well, the outside world, I'm sure they think the sky is falling or blah, 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 meaning that inside we know what the real truth is. But over and over again in life, we see that's just not really the case. That anytime I'm judging myself, I have a tendency to judge myself on my intentions, whereas others have a tendency to judge me on my results. So when it comes to, well, how am I doing in my career? How am I doing as a husband? How am I doing as a dad? How am I doing in the various roles that I'm in? My own personal judgment on that might not be the most accurate overall because I'm like, well, I intended to do this, I'm trying to do that, and my desire is to do this. Intentions compared to results, it is the outside world that probably fixates on the results a little bit more. And so I do think it's appropriate, even this sounds like outside noise coming from the outside world and fans prone to, as Kirby Smart says, see the sky is falling. I do think it's important to say out loud that as Georgia begins its work here in 2026, spring practice starting this week, you'll blink your eyes, it's fall, you're playing games again, and you're going through it. Once again, year 11 for Kirby Smart here coming up. As all of that takes place, I think it's important to say out loud that Georgia does need to have better end-of-season results this year than it's had the last couple of years. And I love winning SEC championships. But if you'll notice, you don't really see anybody wearing back-to-back SEC championship T-shirts. There's championship apparel for 2024. There's championship apparel for 2025. But you don't really see the back-to-back SEC champion T-shirts the same way you saw back-to-back national championship T-shirts after the 2022 season. And it's not because we don't like winning the SEC. It's because Georgia is playing for bigger goals. Now, it's not national championship or bust necessarily, but Georgia has failed to make the playoff in 2023, lost its first playoff game in 2024 and 2025. The sky is not falling. Georgia is still, I would say, the gold standard when it comes to programs in college football. But as Georgia begins this spring, it does begin the spring, hopefully knowing that the results at the end of the season do need to be better than they've been the last couple of years. Big resource programs have big expectations, and end-of-season results, Georgia's probably been a notch below its expectations the last couple of years, and I'm sure they'll be motivated to be different than that here in 2026, and I'm hoping that we hear some of that language here this year. Kirby in that same clip goes on to say, the first way we get better is through talent acquisition. It's transfer portal, it's recruiting, it's retaining the guys that we have. And that is one of the main reasons why I am so optimistic about what I think that Georgia can be this year. I really like this roster a lot. And it's not perfect, right? It's inexperienced at wide receiver. It's a big question about how you replace Monroe Freeling. We'll talk to Jon Stinchcomb about that in a moment. You can find areas in which you're not quite so sure, a little wondering about this, a little wondering about that. But overall, boy, especially compared to most of the rest of college football, this roster still looks really good here right now. So if Georgia's trying to be as good as can be and maybe get better than it was a year ago, what you do to put a roster together is step one towards doing that. We'd say that Georgia, for the most part, has had a pretty successful offseason in terms of holding on to what it had, bringing in some interesting guys from high school, going out and making some judicious decisions related to the transfer portal. We think this roster looks pretty good here at the moment. And yet, even with that being true, there are still areas in which you got to take the talent that you have and you've got to deploy it in an effective way on on the field this season when the fall gets here, and what you do during the spring lays the groundwork for you to do that. A couple of areas that people could point to. We've talked a lot about pass rush. Boy, the statistics pass rush wise a year ago, not very flattering. It seems obvious that's a great area for improvement. People talk about the explosive play rate on offense compared to the total plays run. That was pretty low for Georgia a year ago. Explosive plays are down in college football overall, but in particular for Georgia, they could be better in that particular category. That's an example of what you can do to improve. So you've got the roster in place. We think it's a good one. Now you've got the job of, well, how do you develop these guys during the spring so you can deploy them during the fall? And obviously that puts a spotlight on not just Kirby Smart, but the guys he has working for him. Glenn Schumann on the defense, Mike Bobo on the offense, always generating a lot of conversation, some of it fair, maybe some of it not. But either way, guys like that very much in the spotlight. I would say this is going to be especially true in a year like 2026 because much the same way that people will sometimes compare Mike Bobo to a guy like Buster Faulkner who once worked at Georgia, and now Buster's in the SEC at Florida. Glenn Schumann may get some of that too because a guy that he worked with, Will Muschamp, who obviously Kirby Smart knows very well, is now the defensive coordinator at Texas. So not only will the spotlight that always exists on Georgia coaches be there the way that it always is, it may be even more so this year because of the obvious comparisons that are going to be taking place. But once again, if we use Kirby's words last year as a tone setter for what we might hear this week about this year, Kirby Smart is just as confident in his assistant coaches as ever. This is what he said on the topic of criticism and discussion and what people think about guys like Schumann and Bobo last year. Here's Kirby Smart from almost exactly a year ago.
To be honest with you, I don't get into it much. I worked in a place for 10 years before I came here, and it's my 10th spring, so that's 20 years that, I really don't pay much attention to anything outside. I got a lot of confidence in this organization, the foundation we've built. I've got the best staff in the country, and I have no doubt about that. I've got one of the most experienced SEC staffs there is, and to be honest with you, there's a lot of confidence in that, and I have a lot of confidence in it.
So once again, I reiterate what I said a moment ago. Kirby Smart knows far more about football than me, knows far more about football than you. Collectively, we have less expertise than he does. But collectively, we're better at establishing what the actual expectations for Georgia football are supposed to be and how well Georgia is achieving those expectations. We're just better at doing it because the outside world's always better at judging us than we are at judging ourselves because of our tendency to want to judge our intentions more so than our actual results. So that's important to state. And yet, I don't think what Kirby Smart says there is necessarily inaccurate. I do really like this Georgia coaching staff, top to bottom, and I do think they have a great opportunity, given the talent they've collected, to do something pretty special here in 2026. And the words that Kirby Smart uses this week will set the tone for how all of that happens. It could be a fascinating journey for these Bulldogs here this year, and the first step towards all of that happens as spring practice begins. You better believe around here we're to be watching it very closely. All right, let me shift gears to this. We'll come back to football in a moment, but let me shift to something else that was incredibly entertaining on Sunday. It's a busy weekend for me. I know many of you are much the same way. You're running around, you're watching kids do all kinds of stuff, and I love that. It's the highest and best use for me on this planet, I can promise you, but it does take me away from a lot of things I'd like to be watching closely. For instance, I didn't get a chance to watch the Georgia baseball game as closely as I would like to have, the weekend series against Tennessee, as closely as I would have liked to have, but I was following it. Obviously, to lose on Friday, come back and get a pretty nice, certainly from the bullpen anyway, pretty nice pitching performance on Saturday, even up the series. It comes down to, as so many of these SEC series do, to the rubber match on Sunday. And what an amazing conclusion to this. And it goes incredibly viral. I'll show you some of this on the screen of all of the ways in which the robbed home run pulling the home run off the wall, robbing that thing. Tennessee, after spiking the ball, spiking the bat, thinking it's going to be a home run, lands short. That doesn't happen. Georgia gets a chance to celebrate instead. Here's this hated rival where you get the chance to celebrate. You get the chance to do this. You saw every, social media account. Everybody was talking about this. National websites, major news sites, all of that talking about it. An amazing thing. Cole Johnson has the catch out in the outfield. He's just a freshman. The Tennessee player who hits the ball is the catcher, Stone Lawless. So Lawless thinks he's got a home run. He slams the bat down. He's about to trot around the bases, but Cole Johnson jumps up, makes the catch. Honestly, you should seek this out. We're not going to play the clips for you here, but we can put links up and things like that, and you've probably seen a lot of it. You can go out and find it. Jeff Dancer had a great call on the radio. SEC Network had a very spirited call on all of this. It was just really, really fun. It really was. And listen, college baseball is always going to fight for attention. It needs all of this that it can get. Diamond Dawgs, always a good thing. The day started with the young man from Chattanooga throwing out the first pitch, who had said that, obviously he wasn't going to sing Rocky Top during the Christmas show. And then it concludes with this like this against what is really a hated rival in all sports, but especially those who are super plugged into college baseball. They know how big of a deal this is. The Tennessee baseball team, this is just the way they play. This is just what they do. It's obnoxious taunting and, frankly, conduct unbecoming to slam a bat down like that because you think you hit a home run. And if you do that, that thing better be in the parking lot. That thing better orbit the earth. If you behave the way this Tennessee guy did, the ball you hit better not come down for 6 months. It better not. And it certainly better not end up in somebody's glove, which is exactly what happened. So on behalf of all Georgia baseball fans watching this happen to Tennessee, could not happen to a better bunch than them. They're obviously trying to get used to life in the post-Tony Vitello world. Obviously, the kinds of players that Vitello sought out, Tennessee apparently still fully loaded with here right now. So the fact they had to try back up to Knoxville with their tail between their legs, I think that is a very good thing. And I'll also say this too, a couple of things. On behalf of college baseball, last night after we'd been gone all weekend, we got settled in at home and we watched the United States Dominican Republic game in the World Baseball Classic. And that was a thriller, unbelievable game, incredible stuff. And as I'm watching it, now the World Baseball Classic has better players. It's obviously a bigger stage. But the way in which, the histrionics for the Dominican team and the American team, kind of getting into it and doing their thing, like the way all this is playing out, I mean, to me, I'm like, it feels like watching a college baseball game. It's like a college baseball game with better players. It's a college baseball game on a bigger stage. College baseball game getting some actual media attention, which college baseball never get, of course. But it felt like the way that college baseball feels, just blown up on a bigger stage with the world's greatest athletes playing in a moment like that. So if you watch the World Baseball Classic and you like the intensity of folks playing for their own country and the way that all that goes, honestly, that's what college baseball is like every weekend. And that's what the SEC is especially like when you get Georgia and Tennessee together. And so if you missed the Georgia baseball thing, but you did watch Skeens last night against the Dominicans, honestly, that's kind of the same vibe you got from Georgia, Tennessee. So if you've never checked out college baseball before, I'd say it's a pretty good time to do it because it is a really fun sport. And I'll also say this in conclusion, and I'm going to jam. This is like the worst stereotype of the media. I'm going to use the news of the day to sort of justify my agenda, whatever it is. Well, my agenda as of late has been maybe the SEC should just consider breaking off and doing its own thing. Maybe in this world of trying to figure out what college athletics is supposed to be, maybe the SEC could say, hey, y'all can figure that over here. We're going to stay down here and do our thing because our thing works pretty well just as it is. We don't really need you. We can create our own competition, and people seem to like it. And I couldn't help but think, as this Georgia-Tennessee thing played out on Sunday, and everybody's watching the video and sharing the video, the thing goes mega viral all over the place, could not help but think that it's pretty special. And it brought to mind for me the fact that, in football, we're not going to see Georgia-Tennessee for the next couple of years. That seems like a shame. Two programs are very close to each other. It's not really as historic a rivalry as other rivalries that Georgia has, but it is a little bit of a new school rivalry. I would say, especially if you live up in North Georgia, the average Georgia fan has plenty of disdain for Tennessee for what to them feel like self-evident reasons. And we're not going to see that for the next couple of years. Now, there's a trade-off for that. If you want to play Oklahoma frequently, and if you want to play the other interesting name brands in the SEC, Texas now in the league, and teams like LSU and other teams kind of far out west that you don't get to see as much, if you want to play them more, you're going to play somebody else less, and in the case of Georgia, it just ends up being Tennessee. But when I'm watching this play out in baseball between Georgia and Tennessee, couldn't help but think, boy, it's a shame we won't be seeing this tension in football, at least for the next few years. They'll cycle back on. But you're going to be playing them less frequently than you used to in this new conference world where there's rotating opponents and, things of that nature. It's going to be seeing them a little bit less frequently than you once did. So it did make me think, well, what if there was just a 15-game SEC schedule, and that's what your season was, and you didn't play anybody else, but you got all the SEC, you got Tennessee every year, plus the other teams that you currently play a lot less. Would that work in football? When you watch the intensity of baseball and the rotational schedule and how much fun this is for those who follow that sport, it makes me think that it might. And it does, whether it be, we'll get to some of the drama related to the SEC and basketball before the show is done today. We're obviously a football show, but there's a lot going on outside of football right now. The SEC is just good at cultivating drama. There's always plenty of that in football. There's a ton of that in basketball right now. Baseball provides it for those that pay attention to it. That whatever's needing fixing and whatever issues college sports has, the one thing the SEC has is a phenomenal brand when it comes to competition. Week after week, sport after sport for the entire year. And when you think about solutions for what the world might look like in the future, as much of SEC versus SEC as you can get, probably a pretty good thing. Couldn't help but think about that when I was watching a tremendous reaction to an unbelievable moment for Georgia baseball getting the walk-off win against Tennessee, robbing the home run, and for the Vols, who love nothing more than taunting and, trying to show up their opponents and all the stuff that kind of gets on your nerves a little bit, to see that put in its place as they have to go back to Knoxville on the heels of a losing weekend in Athens. I'd say for Georgia fans, that was a very good thing. My name's Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Glad to have you with us here today. Fun to pay attention to all these Georgia sports here this weekend. Obviously, football getting going. Pro Day this week. Spring practice getting going this week. The basketball team heading towards March Madness. We'll talk about that here coming up in just a moment, too. Thrilled to have you with us for it, whether it's live on video, radio, Athens Sports Radio 960, The Ref, or whatever else, podcast, Apple, Spotify, all those tremendous platforms. Just really happy to have you as a part of the program. We've also got Jon Stinchcomb here coming up in a moment. One of the things that we did on Friday's show was looked pretty closely at the big questions related to Georgia and the start of spring practice. For me, a lot of that centers around the offensive line. That may be my number one top question. What happens in the absence of Monroe Freeling? How does Georgia figure that out? They went from what I thought might be, on paper, best offensive line in America, at least having a chance to be that, to now still probably being pretty good, but being good with some questions. What's next for Georgia and all that? I think that John's going to be really good at helping us answer some of that and some of the other things related to Georgia getting going for spring practice here this week. All of that is on the way coming up. Really fun stuff with Jon Stinchcomb. Looking forward to having him as a part of DawgNation Daily here today. I'll also say this. We have had tremendous feedback on something we've done for a couple of years. Wasn't quite so sure we're going to do it again this year. But honestly, the feedback's been pretty resounding on this. So your chance to be involved with something fun with us. We'll tell you more about that before we're done here today. It's obviously a really fun time. One of our favorite times in the sporting calendar. We're right in the middle of that on DawgNation Daily here today. Before any of that, though, let's get ready to go around the doghouse. It's poured today by our friends at Mercier Orchards Hard Cider. And obviously the big news yesterday is Georgia finds out its opponent and where it'll be playing. And most importantly, maybe for many of you, when it will be playing. Gets the late Thursday night slot. Now, there had been some chatter of, well, maybe Georgia could get the East region. Some of the bracketology had Georgia playing in the East, which would have meant its first-round game would have been in Greenville, which, depending on where you live in North Georgia, not a difficult place to get to for those who'd like to travel there. As it ends up, Georgia not going to Greenville, nor do I think any SEC teams in the East, I don't think. Georgia instead going way up on the banks of the Erie Canal. They'll play in Buffalo, New York, late on Thursday against St. Louis. Now, I would say just first blush, we'll get more into this as the week goes on. But to me, the Billikens of St. Louis feel like, and come to you for basketball breakdowns. I'm just going to give you a small opinion, and we'll get more into it as the week rolls on. The Billikens of St. Louis feel like a much more winnable opponent, beatable opponent, more winnable game for Georgia than what you would have seen a year ago when you were facing a Gonzaga team that was probably underseeded, and some might say intentionally underseeded. That Gonzaga is a team that for a million years has been making deep runs in the playoffs. Mark Few, very respected coach. In the case of St. Louis, it ain't Rick Majerus coaching them anymore. That, and St. Louis may be the best team that basketball's ever seen, but it does not feel like you're playing Gonzaga, right? So in round one, feels like you've got a much more winnable game than it probably felt like you had to begin last year's tournament, knowing your opponent was going to be Gonzaga. Now, none of us expected Georgia to get down as big to the Zags as they did, but we all went into that knowing, boy, this is a program historically much more seasoned in tournament play than obviously what Georgia is. This just feels different against St. Louis. Now, if you do advance past the Billikens and you get to Michigan, well, at that point in time, you're facing arguably one of the two best teams in this tournament. So that's a very, very tough draw. But if you get to the weekend, it's almost like, who cares? I mean, if you could win any tournament game, it'd be a huge accomplishment for Georgia, and it should be celebrated as a huge accomplishment for Georgia. And as we've said before when we talk basketball, I realize there are those of you, and you have every right to feel this way, you want Georgia to be as good at basketball as the very best of the SEC, and I totally get that. I think it's a very understandable thing to want. But given what reality is, we got to also acknowledge what would be a monumental feat. And unfortunately, based on the, program's results the last few decades, just winning a tournament game would be a monumental feat. And Georgia and its coach, Mike White, and the players that are part of this would deserve a huge pat on the back for that. So that's what we begin with. Just getting a tournament win would be gigantic for Georgia. And playing St. Louis in round one certainly feels like you've got a chance to do that, perhaps more so than it would have felt like a year ago against Gonzaga. Now, Mike White has talked about all of this, including what it feels like for him to be looking across the draw. In the field, you're happy about that. But, of course, this time of year, any team you play is also going to be a tournament-level team, too. That's what Mike White said.
We're playing a dangerous team, and we're pretty dangerous ourselves. Had a great regular season. Had a great fight the other day. After a really slow start, of course, in the SEC tournament, and we're just honored to have another chance to see where this thing takes us. Excited for these guys to be able to compete again together.
Yeah, I mean, I think excited is a good word. I think you deserve the right to feel excited. Making March Madness, making back-to-back years. Georgia hasn't done that in more than 20 years. I think that's a really good thing. I also think it's probably interesting if you're a basketball coach. In football, when you start thinking about, well, who could we play in the SEC championship or who could we play in the college football playoff? There are multiple options for who that could be, but it's not a million. If you have big support staff, you can do some advanced scouting. Teams don't really admit this, but they're always thinking about who they should be looking at and what weird thing might come their way. We're going to have to play a service academy. We're going to have to do whatever. There are some things you might be thinking about of advanced scouting that could go on. You have a reasonable idea of what all the options are. I'm imagining for basketball, it must be one of those things where, gosh, we could be playing one of 20-something teams. It could be this team. It could be that team. It could be, a couple of dozen other options. So I'm guessing getting ready for who you might play, I'm guessing that probably does feel like a challenge. And Georgia finds that at St. Louis. To be honest with you, it's been a long time since I've thought about the University of St. Louis for any reason, but that's now who Georgia has to play. And so for this Georgia coaching staff, they have to pretty quickly get up to date on everything related to the Billikens. And that's something that Mike White says he and his staff are quite eager to do. This is Coach White again.
Pretty good amount, not as much as I'll know by the time the ball is tipped, but spacing, execution, tempo, skill level, 5 out, just good offensive rhythm, just good teams, that they've had, just watching them on TV over the years. Hadn't seen them as much again, as I talked about earlier this year, but I will have seen enough here probably by tomorrow afternoon. Obviously we'll have our hands full.
So he talks about tempo there. It does seem like, just rudimentary look at stats, they like to run just like Georgia does, and they like to score points just like Georgia does. That these are two teams that best that I can tell. Now, once again, I'm not going to give you a full basketball breakdown here, but the best that I can tell, like to play somewhat similarly. I still operate on the hunch, and I said this the other day. If Georgia does win a tournament game, and now we know who it'll need to beat to do so, I continue to believe he's probably not the best player on Georgia's roster, but I do believe in March, Santos Surreal is Georgia's most important player. Because think about this. What if you're playing a team that also wants to play with some tempo and you like playing with tempo, what creates tempo more than anything else? There are two things, a block shot and a defensive rebound. That when the big man controls the paint, block shot leads to transition, defensive rebounds lead to the opportunity for runouts, that if you want your chance to get moving offensively, what you do on the defensive end is what allows that. And a guy like Surreal, I think, can be the difference between winning and losing this first-round tournament game, creating those opportunities for Georgia to get out and go. That could be the difference. This could be a pretty fun game to watch. And it's not quite the team with the same pedigree that Gonzaga had a year ago. I would say on paper seems more winnable, and seeing how Georgia handles all of this. Well, very late on Thursday night, we expect to be tuned in, and we'd love nothing more than to be talking about this team moving into the first weekend there in a potential matchup against a very good Michigan team. Fun to have the Dogs back in March Madness once again. And, of course, that's Around the Doghouse, poured today by our friends at Mercier Orchards Hard Cider. As you're settling in to watch some basketball, we would say the beverage of choice for you, a great option would be our friends at Mercier Orchards Hard Cider. We've been showing you golden shoes lately of a lot of folks who like to get in the car, go up there and take the visit. Blue Ridge, Georgia, the gorgeous mountains of North Georgia. It's a wonderful thing to see. And if you're curious about where a product like this comes from, honestly, it's a really cool thing to see. You can watch the Mercier Orchards Hard Cider made right there in front of you. You can actually be a part of the apple picking that will produce the fruits that create Mercier Orchards Hard Cider. All of this is a real product made with real ingredients grown right there in Georgia. And on our show, we love the idea of helping this Georgia-grown company grow a little more. So we think if you love the category of beverage, or if you want to be introduced to a fun category of beverage, the hard cider, you're going to love the flavor of Mercier Orchards Hard Cider. You're going to feel a certain sense of pride knowing it came right here from North Georgia, where many of us have called our home for a very long time. So please do me a favor. Ask for it by name. Tell your favorite grocer or your beverage store or your restaurant on tap there, hey, BA from DawgNation Daily is talking about Mercier Orchards Hard Cider. Can we get that stocked up here? Because I'd love to try some. And honestly, what we're seeing is a lot of folks are saying, yeah, you know what? If y'all want it, we'll find it for you. The same way we try to serve people well here. Our grocers and our beverage store folks are trying to do the same thing. So let them know you want the great taste of Mercier Orchards Hard Cider. And we think they'll stock it up for you. Or when you do find it, make sure you grab it, because this is a hot commodity here right now. Mercier is spelled Mercier. You can search it, Mercier Orchards Hard Cider, and enjoy it today. All right, before we're done, speaking of the tournament, there is some pretty interesting drama as it relates to that event and a couple of SEC teams. We think you need to know about that, and we're going to invite you to be a part of a really fun thing as it relates to DawgNation Daily, what is now becoming a bit of a tradition for us. All of that is on the way, but for now, it is Jon Stinchcomb here today on DawgNation Daily. Happy to have him and all of you with us today.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Say hello to Jon Stinchcomb. Jon, you and I are of a similar age. I'm a couple of years older than you are, but we are of a similar age. When I was young, the NCAA tournament was college ball has always been my favorite sport. But when I was younger, I'm talking about child, teenager, even into my 20s, there was no single event in college football that I liked more than the NCAA basketball tournament. I've always loved this event. I liked college football better, but this particular event, March Madness, was back in high school when you had to try to figure out a way to watch the games. You had the rolling cart with the TV, that had the VCR underneath it. We all have our own nostalgia about stuff like this. But because it was a little bit of a challenge to watch the games, it just became this, romanticized idea in my head. Did you grow up the same way? Did you love March Madness when you were younger?
I loved it because of the lore that it created and just the atmosphere. It was fun because you're seeing teams and schools that I'd never really heard of that are having shots at a championship and upsets and the whole thing. So whether it was the Fab Five in Michigan or the Leitner turnaround jumper at the end of the game, the run and gun from UNLV. There was just so many exciting games and moments. Reminds me a lot of the spring breaks that we had in Panama City, where in the background would be the TV and the Final Four is on, and it was just a lot of excitement. So I certainly grew up in that era of mystique and like to reminisce about those days, those fun times of watching March Madness.
And I would say that for me, while I agree with everything you just said, there was also a level underneath that was even better for me. It's the schools that I'd never heard of that became basically like super famous to me. Like, for instance, well before Georgia played Gonzaga last year, Gonzaga becomes this incredible, fixture of March. You never thought about Spokane, Washington any other time of the year, but every March you knew Gonzaga was going to come in, and it's Casey Calvary, it's Dan Dick, it's all the guys they had throughout the years. Or it's like Harold Arsenault from Weber State or Bryce Drew from Valparaiso. It's like all these places, you just realize what a big country it is and how different the world is a couple hundred miles from where you live. And I don't know, March Madness was always this really interesting thing to give you a pretty good window about how different the country was. Like when I was a kid, Evansville, they had sleeves on their basketball jersey. Like there was all this weird stuff that you only saw during March Madness. And that's, I think, one of the reasons I also romanticize it. Yeah, I love Fab Five. I loved Vegas. I loved all the really glamorous teams that ran through my lifetime. But I also loved those weird, super small teams that it was almost hard to believe they really existed. I loved that part of it too.
Yeah, and then when they make it to the Sweet 16 and you have to spend some time that week, because I didn't have cell phones that have a computer in your pocket, but figuring out where Weber State is or Belmont or, Gonzaga, where are these schools? Who even knew about them? So you had to spend some time looking them up and figuring out where they are on the map. It's exciting. I love this time of year. I'm grateful that Georgia is making a historic run, which is almost sad to say, but let's rejoice in the good in that it's back-to-back years in the tournament with an arrow-up program that potentially has a winnable game in round one of the tournament, and just shows the work that Coach White and his staff has put in for us to be relevant again in a time where Georgia basketball has reeled a little bit, and we hang on to Ant-Man and his success in the NBA. But what a great time to be a Dawg and recognize that our program is really building into something that we can be proud of.
And listen, I don't think either one of us want to break down the St. Louis Billikens, but this does feel like a winnable game. Michigan in round two, if you got there, probably does not feel as much like a winnable game. But you know what? If Georgia could get to the first weekend, I'd say hang the mission accomplished banner, print the T-shirts. I'd love nothing. Georgia could lose to Michigan by 40 points, or I don't think they would, but they could. Just to get to the second weekend, I'd be more than happy to say, man, or such the first weekend, I mean to say, second round, first weekend, just to be able to get to the weekend, man, hang the banner, print the shirts. It'd be great to beat St. Louis, though, wouldn't it?
It sure would. And I think it would be exciting for this entire program. I think we've seen that Coach White each year has systematically tried to move the needle, and I feel like we've continued to do that. You look at the number of wins, regular season wins this basketball team has, and just the overall performance. The fact that we're leading in multiple categories across college basketball, something that's a rarity for Georgia. And it's the energy in the Stegman Coliseum has been better. The fan engagement, whether it's from the students or just overall support, has increased. And you recognize the direction of this program, and you have to feel really excited about it. Now, what can really help that is a tournament win, right? Last year, we were kind of breaking through that glass ceiling of making it to the tournament, and now we can take another step in a big win. And BA, it was not so much of a hot take when you say Santos Surreal and his contributions could really impact the game. I think you look at their losses and recognize the number of games where he's either fouled out or been ejected, and the impact that that's had on Georgia's performance. And it's not a far leap, a big leap of faith to say that he could really be a difference maker come Thursday night.
No, I think that's exactly right. I promise we'll talk football, but let me ask you, did you see, maybe we're not watching the game live, but the clips, the viral moment from Georgia baseball on Sunday, the robbed home run, the indignity that Tennessee has to suffer on their way out of Foley Field? If it was a food, I would eat it. I cannot get enough of this. It was thrilling. And honestly, like last night, we busy weekend, got home. I'm watching Into the Players, Into the NASCAR, go to watch the World Baseball Classic. But honestly, the entire time I'm just sort of sitting around and catching up on sports. This stuff just keeps popping up on the phone over and over again. This thing really blew up last night.
I love it when a moment goes viral, and it's a twofold win for Georgia. One, it's Georgia's outfielder making a great, fantastic snag over the wall, and two, to watch the egg drip down the face of Tennessee as they realized their early gloating was premature and unnecessary and unwarranted. Double win for the Dogs in that not only did they win the game, they also made Tennessee look pretty silly in the same vein and the same play, and win the series. So another program within the Georgia athletic department that had a great weekend, and there's excitement for them as well. As many news faces, I'm trying to learn their roster, as much turnover as there is for Georgia baseball, trying to learn who our players are. But in the process, they've found their way into making some pretty viral moments and making their mark on this season early on.
Yeah, shout out to Cole Johnson. Great catch to conclude that for him. So let's get into football, and we'll go from the fun. Let me get kind of in the weeds here with you just for a moment, because I think when Georgia begins spring practice, what you do now in the absence of Monroe Freeling becomes a really big topic. So tell me about Juan Gaston for a moment. Do you think that Gaston, in just first blush, your opinion, is he ready to move out towards tackle, or do you think that guard is still the best place for him in 2026? How do you think Georgia should use Juan Gaston here this season?
I think his skill set would certainly lend to being able to be a highly functioning tackle in the SEC and beyond. So that's where I would train him early on, give him that opportunity to kind of earn that position. There's going to need to be growth, not surprisingly. I mean, I think he stepped in admirably as a true freshman, as did Glover, in that you hope you don't need guys to step in the way that they did, but they performed at a great level, and you saw their progression throughout the season. That's going to need to continue for both guys, and with an opening at left tackle, obviously a premier position for any team, but when you lose a player of Freeling's caliber, a high first-round draft pick to the NFL, who we saw his progression as a player, I think it's going to be very important for Georgia, for our success heading into this next season, to get some of these young players up to speed sooner rather than later, and spring ball is a great way to do it. You come off of last season for some of these young freshmen that did have playing time, that were kind of baptism by fire throughout the season. Now they've had a little off season to build the muscle, to try to train themselves outside of the 315 pounds of what it looks like to be a high school player, and the 315 pounds of what it looks like when you're a starting caliber SEC contributor. Those are two different things. So that sort of development, and then being able to utilize that newfound strength and quickness and agility and explosion, and do so functionally, I think is the importance of what you can find during spring football. So, each year I think this is a very important time of year. And when you see the evolution of Georgia's roster with as many players as we see leave for the NFL on an annual basis, and Coach Smart made an emphasis last year at the beginning of the season saying how young his team is. Well, now for most of these guys, for a lot of these guys, they have 1 year under their belt and understand what it means and what the expectations are. So what they need to contribute and how they need to improve their game is at the forefront, and Gaston leads the charge there as a guy who has a high ceiling. There is an opportunity in front of him, and he's got to put in the work to earn the right to step into that space.
Yeah, I mean, we did a thing the other day about returning starters for Georgia, and the list had 14 returning for Georgia. And one of the guys not mentioned was Juan Gaston. Gaston obviously played a lot, but for the guy tabulating these numbers, you just didn't count him as a starter. And this is an example of one of the reasons why I'm actually really optimistic about Georgia right now is when you think about the known returners that people outside of our bubble are aware of. Georgia looks pretty good on paper. But I would say a guy like Gaston is not well known unless you're a hardcore football fan right now. And John, I mean, I try to talk to people who know more about this than I do, including yourself. You know far more about it than me. And boy, when it comes to raw potential put on display last year, seems like there's a lot of excitement about what Gaston could be. Now, a lot of that's also taking good care of yourself, making sure you're in pristine physical condition, and you still got to do some to live into all that. But a lot of people are very bullish on Gaston. I don't think the country knows about him at all yet. So if you want the most pie in the sky, blue sky, this is how great things could be, thinking about Juan Gaston in a conversation like that is certainly a good way to get there. Of Freeling steps away, but look at this guy ready to step in who's every bit the prospect one day that Freeling is now. That is where some of my optimism does rest right now, John. I do have to say that.
Yeah, and I think it's justified. I think it's more of, you see him hop off the bus and you get excited because, boy, he's big and pretty. I mean, you watch the way he moves. You saw moments, especially social media is good for this. You can get a 1 second or a 5 second clip and of one play and get real excited about, he's a big man that trucks cornerbacks because he moves well and he's got a nasty side to him. Now, for him to be an SEC caliber starter at left tackle, the fundamentals have to come along. The technique has to be refined, and you combine that. It's a bridled situation where you've got the physical abilities, which he has in plenty of, and you combine that with the technique to match, and that's where you get players that go from really good to elite. And I certainly think that he's got that capability, but it's just a matter of progressing his game, understanding what the needs are and how to utilize that skill set that he possesses consistently, so that it's not just 2 or 3 plays that look good on Twitter, and it's a season's body of work where you say, man, this guy, not only was he dominant on those highlight moments, but the consistency in play in and play out, that's what really defines the great players. And that's when it becomes a work in progress. And you hope that, this spring is fruitful for them and he continues that progression that he's on.
No, I think that's interesting. To talk about a different lineman for a moment. So I don't think we've ever gotten official confirmation, I'm talking about from the team itself, about what took Drew Bobo off the field at the end of the season. The internet seems to think it was Liz Frank. And I'm not a doctor, I won't pretend to know, but that's a pretty commonly held assumption on the internet, while never, I think, officially confirmed by George, I don't think. If it is something along those lines, how concerned would you be? Because when Bobo's healthy, he's a very good player. But would you be worried about an injury like that lingering into the season if the internet is correct about what he's dealing with?
I sure hope not. I mean, obviously, for an offensive lineman, it starts at the base, and you got to have a good foundation, be able to stop power, be able to move your feet, especially the way we ask our centers to get out in space. And obviously, with Drew Bobo, not only is he kind of the lead communicator across the front and getting everybody on the same page, but we utilize the fact that he's multifaceted. He can move well in space. He can anchor against power, and you can ask of him in certain situations that you probably couldn't for other centers across our conference. So getting him back would be a huge boost for this group. Hopefully it's not something that lingers. I think you saw the effects. Georgia was able to kind of compensate in some ways with him gone, and I thought they did so admirably, but much better group when he is healthy and at the center and at the helm of that offensive line.
It's also one of those things too, where if you assume, okay, well that's enough time, he will be healthy, ready to go for the fall. I mean, we've seen some of Georgia's best players not participate in spring practice the year before they had the big performance during the fall. Guys like Nakobe Dean, Brock Bowers, like some of the very best were just, it's always like a labrum or something like that where they just don't go through spring practice. So if we assume, or at least not full participants, if we assume that Drew Bobo is going to be healthy, what an opportunity this is for Malachi Tolliver. We saw play some. A guy like Cortez Smith, who I think has a chance to be really good. What an opportunity it is for them. Now, we hope it's just spring and Drew's ready to go for the fall, but assuming that's the situation, for guys like Smith and Tolliver, this is a good chance to get more valuable reps, and so they can be ready to compete to be the next man up, right?
Absolutely. And we've already named 4 players that are young, that have had less than a year in Athens on campus of real football. So for Tolliver, for Gaston, for Glover, for Smith, all those guys are, just at the very start of this collegiate career for themselves, and they have to get better. And a great opportunity, however it presents itself, the more times you get to get out on the field and get the reps, the better for you. And the list of names that you mentioned from the veterans, for whether it was Brock Bowers or Nakobe Dean, they probably know the system. They probably know what they need to work on their own game, but it's not a matter of understanding assignment and philosophy, approach, calls, all those things they have, just like Drew Bobo does. I mean, he doesn't need spring ball to understand that aspect of the game. The younger players, they still do. They're still learning, and it's different when you don't get the reps week in and week out during the season, and it's just practice, and when you get thrown into the fire. And so whether it's Tolliver or Smith, and they're rotating through in the ones during this spring training camp, I think that's invaluable time for them, where they're thrust into that position. Theoretically, whether Drew's available or not this time of year, it is great for them that they have to make the calls, and they feel the pressure of getting up, getting set, getting everybody on the right page, and then executing. So, great opportunity. I think that's the best part of spring ball, is for these younger players to kind of continue their progression, understanding where they are, and by the end of things, say, I've got June and July to get everything ironed out and as prepared as possible for when season starts and really gets cranking up.
Okay, I've kept you long. Let me squeeze in one more thing. I'm thinking here for a moment about like the Daniel Calhouns, the Michael Weenies, and guy. I mean, there's going to be if we say Gaston's a tackle, that means the guard spot's open, and it's going to be a knockdown drag out to see who gets that. And there are a couple of guys, like in the case of Calhoun, I've always been a fan of his. I liked him a lot in high school, but I'm not a fan of anybody, if you get my drift on that. If I'm a player, if I've been on the roster and I'm ready for playing time, what do I do to reboot the impression of myself? What do I do to earn a new look? What do I do to say new year, new me? How does a guy who's been here but now ready for his moment, because I would say that Micah Morris handled that very well a year ago. Micah had not played as much as he wanted to and became a bedrock part of this team. How does somebody new do that here in 2026?
I think Calhoun's another guy that probably could get some reps at tackle. And one, it's anytime there's space available because of starters that have left or folks are graduating and moving out. Freeling and Morris have been bell cows for this offensive line for a long time, and now that they're moving on, that creates space. And the second piece of this is new offensive line coach. So even though he was in the building, now that there's a new face at the helm who's running the meetings and will be the voice that's heard at practice, that's a great opportunity for the same players that may have been a part of this system for a year or two to get that opportunity and make their mark. And I really do think that spring practice, there's still value here because everything's written in pencil. There's absolutely nothing written in stone. and you can make those impressions. And the good news about Georgia practices is that you're competing against the very best. So if you can perform consistently during practice, even if it's in late March and early April, then that's an attention getter, and you can be on the radar for the coaching staff as somebody that they need to have a plan for, and expectations, which is a good thing when you get to training camp. And so for all these guys that have not started, just because there's a new shiny toy in town, or a guy like Juan who has the physical stature to potentially be that left tackle or starting left guard, whatever that is, you got to earn it. And so we could have easily been talking about Cahoon or Uini or any of the others that have been a part of this system for another year more than they have, and said, he's the next man up. But it creates competition, and hopefully the iron is sharpening iron, and everyone's getting better. So I think this is a great time of year, especially when you have young guys and there's opportunity for them. It creates a hunger and a competition that makes this team better in a time of year that otherwise can get kind of stale and stagnant.
So as I say goodbye to you, our guy Wilbur in our DawgNation live chat points out, we're talking about other sports earlier, you've also got the women's track team that won the indoor national championship. Now, I'm not an expert on that, won't pretend to be, but certainly happy to see them doing very well too. So a lot of things to celebrate when it comes to UGA athletics here this weekend, John.
Absolutely. Always great to be a Dawg, especially when we're winning championships and making Tennessee look silly and entering into March Madness. So we're winning on so many different fronts, and I think it's just a great testament to the athletic department at Georgia and the bar that's been set and continue to press into championships on so many different points.
That is very true, John. Have a great weekend. Not great weekend, great week. We're coming off a weekend and a great week. We'll look forward to talking to you soon.
I like the way you think, BA. Hope you have a great week too, buddy. Go Dogs.
Go Dogs. Good stuff.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, I'm one of those guys. I can't really pretend to know about sports that I don't really know about, frankly. Even the sports I think I do know about, I could probably know a little bit more. So Wilbur points out women's track team does win the indoor national championship. So great to see them doing well, too. Fun time for UGA athletics. And, frankly, it's just great to have an athletic department around Georgia that's as relevant in these various sports as it is. Collectively, things are about as good as they've been across all sports. Not every sport doing as well as they'd like to, but collectively, the tide seems pretty high here right now, which is a very good thing. Let me tell you something else that's very good before we do our SEC Through. It's our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau, and you have to have insurance. I'm talking about legally, you have to have, like, say, auto insurance. It's one of those things that you just got to do. So you got to think, well, who do I work with? Well, my recommendation would be, because if you're like me, I really don't know how insurance works in terms of, like if I have a fender bender or something like that, what's going to happen? Well, I'm going to be dependent on my agent helping walk me through that, and then whatever steps in the process after that. That means when you're talking to an agent or a claims adjuster or anything like that, you want there to be a friendly person on the other side of that phone call. And no better example of that than our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau. We say this all the time. They're always the home team. What that means is they're Georgians just like you, in communities like yours, doing things like you do, and helping you with all of your insurance needs, the same way they've taken care of Georgia's farmers for such a long time. So auto insurance, home insurance, even life insurance, and all the things associated with that, our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau got you on it all. So reach out and talk to them today. 877-404-1050. That's 877-404-1050, or online, gfbinsurance.com. All right, a couple of things related to March Madness as we go through our SEC Through here in a moment. So let me start self-serving, then we'll work our way beyond that. I did not think we were going to do a bracket challenge again this year. The Golden Shoe Bracket Challenge, thought maybe it'd run its course. A year ago, we were supposed to bring the winners on the air. We didn't do that. We dropped the ball. But honestly, the feedback on this is like, BA, we're going to give you another chance. We want to do this again. People seem to like it. It's just for fun. We've always promised that this is not like the mortgage company that's going to give you $1 billion or whatever else. This is just for fun. There really is no cash pride. Like there is no cash. Like, this is just for fun. This is just for pride. This is just for a pat on the back. This is something we've done. We weren't going to do it again. People said, "No, BA, we want to do this. Hey, you got to bring back the Golden Shoe Bracket Challenge." So before we're done today, we will give you the official invite to be a part of our Golden Shoe Bracket Challenge. And I do have some ideas how we can make it better than it's been before. I'm not going to say too much because we haven't fulfilled promises in the past, but we're going to try to do better with that this year. I did see something online. I don't know if this is true or not, but I did see this online, that apparently ESPN still has not given the prize to its official bracket winner last year. There's so much slop on the internet that's fake. Maybe that's fake too, but I did see that. I hope it's true, because if it is, it'll make me feel better for not always fully executing to our full power and potential the Golden Shoe Bracket Challenge. But for those who want to, we are going to bring it back. And if you do want to, and you've participated in a bracket challenge in the past, I will tell you, you can't go back, obviously, to the old bracket. It's going to be a new link to this year's bracket. So I'll give all that to you here coming up in just a little bit. We want you to be a part of that. I also want to share this with you. I thought this was interesting. I like the Bear, Chris Felica. Some of y'all know him. They're from Fox Sports now. He always has some interesting numbers online, and I wanted to pull these up because what you see when you look at some of the data, tournament field release yesterday, this is a completely different tournament than it was even a few years ago, and NIL has changed things. Now, NIL transfer portal working together. Now, change it for the better, change it for the worse. I don't know that there is a definitive answer to that. It's just different than it once was. Because what you don't see anymore are a lot of what you think like the mid-major teams with chances to make major runs. You just don't see as much of that as you once did. Point spreads are a reflection of this. Now, the flip side of that is, at the top of the tournament, more experience, more NBA-type talent, probably better at the top than it's been. But if you love picking the upset and the team to make the run to the Sweet 16, you probably just don't get as much of that anymore. And if you do plan on participating in our Golden Shoe Bracket Challenge, this is maybe a nugget you should consider as you're making your picks. Let me give this to you from Chris Felica. I'm reading this straight from Twitter. He says there's a historically massive gap this year between the 2, 3, 4, and 5 seeds and the teams there be playing the 15, 14, 13, 12 seeded opponents. This is from Felica. He says this is the first time since 1986 that all 4 2 seeds are favored by at least 20 points. We know that historically 1 seeds always dominate the 16s. You occasionally get a little different in the 2-15, not always dramatically different, but a little bit different. But this year, 2 seeds, huge favorites over the 15 seeds, the way they typically aren't. Felica says dating back to 1985, there have been just 14 games involving a 3 seed versus a 14 seed where the spread was at least 16 points. Some of those spreads, in other words, more narrow than you might think. He says this year, though, all 4 are at least that big, including Illinois, a 23-point favorite over Penn. He says that's the largest point spread ever for a 3-14 game. He also says dating back to 1985, there have just been 20 instances for a 4-13 game with a spread of at least 13 points, but all 4 of them are that big this year. He also says the famous 5-12 game, the old adage in the bracket was you pick a 12 to beat a 5. He says this is the first time since 2000 that every 5-seeded team is favored by at least 7 points in the round of 64. He concludes by saying we only saw 7 first-round upsets last year, and none of the top 4 seeds lost. The numbers suggest upsets might be hard to come by again this year, too. So do with that information what you will, but interesting to point out that as the transfer portal seems to pull from the bottom and raise it up to the top, and the mid-major type programs don't have the NIL to keep their potentially professional level players, a lot more of this talent congregating near the top to the suffering of the mid-major type teams. Last year didn't see a ton of upsets. Felica seems to be suggesting some of that data might point to fewer upsets again this year too. There's also a little bit of drama in the SEC. It's, I think, fascinating that obviously John Calipari had worn out his welcome at Kentucky. They were frustrated, a lot of early first-round upsets to teams they had no business losing to. They wanted to run Calipari out of town. They bring back one of their own, Mark Pope as coach, and Kentucky, not good. Certainly not living up to the promise of a roster that was reported to be in excess of $20 million. They certainly haven't come in close to achieve success commensurate with that. And now Calipari, who leaves Lexington, goes to Arkansas. He gets big NIL spending there. We've said Arkansas is basically tapped out on football, giving their NIL money to basketball. To the benefit of Calipari, he won the SEC tournament on Sunday. And they go into with the, certainly the SEC Player of the Year in ACUF and a chance to make some noise in March. So in this particular breakup, seems like Calipari has won the breakup over his previous employer. Right now, Coach Cal with the Chicken Man money in Arkansas looks a lot more set up for success than Kentucky seems to look like without him, and that has been a hot topic. Social media message boards, what Calipari is currently doing at Arkansas compared to what Kentucky has failed to do in his absence there in Lexington. People are noticing that. People are also noticing that Auburn did not make the field, and it's interesting. If you hate Auburn, most of you within the sound of my voice do, you'll love, we said this now for a couple of days, you'll love all of the stuff that's out there. And mega controversy that Bruce Pearl was on the CBS desk when the brackets revealed, still on the payroll at Auburn, and more important than that, his son's the coach. So, of course, you're going to tout for your son. The idea that if I was in the same position, that I would choose some arbitrary definition of objectivity over my own flesh and blood. No, I'm not doing that. No. To satisfy what some TV viewer wants, I'm going to pretend like my son, the coach of Auburn, is no different than any other coach, no different than any other team. No, I am definitely not doing that. And if that means that he doesn't belong on the CBS desk, well, that's, somebody else's decision to make. But the idea that Bruce Pearl's not supposed to support his son is, I would say, patently ludicrous. But what is not ludicrous is the argument that maybe Auburn in the post-Bruce Pearl era is not doing very well. I do think that the argument for them making the tournament probably deserved a little bit more of a fair hearing than it got. Now, ultimately, it's probably the right decision. But the point that Bruce Pearl, I think, would make about Auburn is that if they had just played an easier out-of-conference schedule, they would have made the tournament. Where have we heard that before? That sounds a lot like what we hear in the football discussion of they got punished for playing tougher games, so what's the point of playing the tougher games? The argument, I think, has some merit, but ultimately of the games Auburn did play, they just simply didn't win enough of them. So even if that particular point rings true to many of us, what's inarguably true is I think they lost 5 of their last 6 regular season games. And I tell you the other part of this juicy is, do you remember the Charles Bediako story? And we're going to wrap up after this. Remember the Charles Bediako story? Bediako was the G League professional who came back to Alabama. They fought it in court to give him a chance to play. He played in a couple of games. Eventually, they lost in court. Greg Sankey sided with the NCAA over Alabama in this case, and that's one of the things that led to the outcome we would think. And then Bediako, after playing a couple of games, did not play again the rest of the year. Well, do you remember in the small handful of games he played, what he played, 3 games, something like that? In the small handful of games that he played, do you remember what one of those games was? It was a win for Alabama against Auburn. So when it's all said and done, the sum total of the Charles Bediako 2.0 era at Alabama may have been enough to keep Auburn out of the NCAA tournament, which is a fun thing for the Iron Bowl basketball rival. Either way, it's good to have March Madness back. It's fun to see the SEC with so many juicy storylines. And most importantly, it's also fun to think that Georgia, late on Thursday night, up in Buffalo against St. Louis, has a chance to earn an NCAA tournament win. We'll wish them well with that. We'll be watching March Madness, and we'll invite you to participate in our Golden Shoe Bracket Challenge. And for now, we'll make that your SEC through. And speaking of it, as we give you Golden Shoe today, here's what we're going to ask for. If you want to be a part of this, for the most haphazard, disorganized, just for fun way to come together, I promise whatever company you work for, your office pool runs a lot more smoothly than the Golden Shoe Bracket Challenge does. But people seem to like it, and honestly, I like participating with people. So they've asked for it. We're doing it again. Here's what we're going to get from you. Just send me your name, your mailing address, your email, your phone number to brandon.adams@DawgNation.com. I will then send you back a link to be in our Golden Shoe Bracket Challenge. Simple as. Name, mailing address, email, phone number. Send that to me, brandon.adams@DawgNation.com. I'll send you back the link, and we'll have some fun with the Golden Shoe Bracket Challenge. You're invited to be a part of that once again here this year. Now, we'll all also join together and say, hopefully anybody but Florida wins this thing. Speaking of the lousy, stinking Gators, about 1,955 days. I should have put some Brooklyn Dodgers gear on to say that today. 1,955 days. That's how long it's been since Florida's beaten Georgia. That is our Gator Hater Updater. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you back tomorrow. Join us for the Golden Shoe Bracket Challenge, and we'll talk to you then, everybody. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cooldown. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that is promised. All right, we'll get into the topic at hand. I do, though, fact-checking in real time here, have to correct something. HB1201 writes into our YouTube comment section live chat to say that baseball was once the most popular sport in America, but those days are all gone. I got to tell you something. If you're operating on the assumption that baseball is not red hot right now, you're making a huge mistake. First of all, college baseball always fights for attention. Watch the games. Tell me it's not thrilling. But even more important than that, what was on TV last night between Paul Skeens against this vaunted Dominican Republic offense who's scoring 10 runs a game, but found themselves begging for a walk at the end of the game. This was thrilling television. Now, I don't know what the ratings are going to end up being, but I'm guessing, even though it was only FS1 and I know it was going up against the movie show, but my guess is World Baseball Classic probably did pretty well last night. I'm guessing Skeens against the Dominicans probably did pretty well. So miss me with the baseball is old and tired. Baseball is red hot right now. Baseball is having a moment right now. There you go. Danny Thomas pointing out, backed by popular demand, the Golden Shoe Bracket Challenge. We weren't going to do it, but people have asked for it. Now, here's what I am going to do. Because one of our regulars, pretty active on social media, we see him in here, Bill Shirley, was one of two people to tie at the top. I'm going to try to have them on this week to make good what we're supposed to do last year, and we'll see if we can earn back some good graces here. I told you I have some like small giveaway things that I don't want to say too much about it because I just shoot my mouth off and then I haven't succeeded in doing this in the past. But I really am going to try to make good on some of that this year. I'm going to try to. Jeremy Arbin says that HB is trying to say that no one is interested in football and it's going to fall off like baseball. Boy, that's an extraordinary claim. That would require extraordinary evidence. Randy Hall says we need to introduce the golden thermometer. It's still -3 in Alabama. Yeah, that probably works better than that. Y'all remember, I was thinking about this today. We've done so many weird things over the years. Was this year? I think it was this year. The golden spittoon that we tried to do. I just said it was just too gross. Y'all remember that? That was a thing we did for a while. Yeah, Wyatt Fielding pointing out that Cole Johnson was trending worldwide last night. Worldwide. Cole Johnson, like this thing went mega viral. It really did. I mean, obviously, social media feeds are so like we've lived in a world now for a while where your social media feed is very what's the word I'm looking for? Curated, very curated. They're way more curated now than they used to be, especially Twitter. Now, oftentimes it curates the wrong way, but social media feeds are getting way more precise, which is probably not great for society overall, but that's a different topic for a different day. But so sometimes your social media feed, depending on whichever platform you like to use, can make you feel like that whatever you're interested in is just going viral. And so obviously people like us, our social media feeds are going to show us Georgia baseball stuff. But last night, this thing really did go viral. Like it wasn't just the way that, once you click like on something, they just start, just annihilating you with that same content. It wasn't just that. This was truly, actually old school, legitimately viral.
Somebody call for the spittoon.
So this is what we tried to do last year. Was that this football season or was that two footballs?
That was this football season.
Golly, man,
September 9th or something
Like, there's nothing that scares me more than little things like this. And I can't remember if this was 3 days ago or 9 years ago. Like that's the thing that scares me the most, is just how all the events of my life are just sort of wadded up in a ball, and they don't seem to happen in any particular order anymore. But we tried to do this back in the fall because some Florida guy spit on somebody, which led to penalties and embarrassment for Florida. And we tried to make a big deal about this, but ultimately just pulled the rug on this. I just don't do gross. You'll notice we don't do any gross stuff. You know, we're pretty clean in terms of family-friendly content, but in addition to that, I don't do anything really gross. I just don't do gross. Garrison Tucker says, speaking of Florida, can we get a real prediction on Florida football for 2026? Well, I always say this when it comes to real predictions. I make no bones about having rivalry opinions, and I like to have, as a, fan of Georgia, I like to have, mal thoughts about, Georgia's rivals. But when it comes to making predictions, I do try to get my predictions right just because it's fun too. So I mentioned this on the show the other day. I have a little bit of a concern that somebody in the SEC is going to be a surprise team. The SEC really hasn't had, I guess, other than Vanderbilt, but it seems like the SEC is due for a surprise team. Due is a stupid word to use, but for lack of a better one, it seems like the SEC is due for a surprise team. I don't want it to be Florida. I have this weird intuition about Auburn right now, that I think Auburn's transformed its roster. I think Alex Golesh is probably an upgrade over what they have had last couple of years with Harsin, and Freeze just turned out to be a far worse coach than I ever would imagine he would have been. So if you said, hey, which Georgia rival could have a better year than you want them to have? I think I'd probably take Auburn over Florida, but I'm on guard because I do think Buster Faulkner's a good coach. And I am on guard that somebody I don't want to have a surprise season may have a surprise season. But if you force me gun to my head, I'd probably say Auburn more so than Florida, but even that's just a hunch. Good question, though. So HB and Jeremy Harbin are having a debate. By the way, I'm already getting submissions. The Golden Shoe Bracket Challenge, we're already getting submissions. So there you go. We're already getting them. That's awesome. Man, that makes me feel so happy. It's weird. Stuff like this is actually what probably fuels me as much as anything, because I love doing the job, but anything can feel like work. And so you got to have these little things along the way that make what you do feel real. You just need this in life. You need to feel like you're a real person doing real work. And when we put out something like this that's really just for fun, it'd be one thing if I was like, hey, I'm going to give you tickets to the national championship game. Well, I'd get 8 million responses to that. But if I say, hey, we're doing this just for fun, this is when you know who your real friends are. So I really appreciate the fact that y'all want to do this. I really do. It means the world to me. This is one of those things that makes me feel like what we're doing is real. So thank you for being a part of this. I really do appreciate that. And it's just fun. We give the update on the standings. Like that part we do pretty well. We haven't always fulfilled our mission on prizes, but in terms of updating the standings and reading stuff on the air, we've actually been pretty good about that. That part we've succeeded in. Let me get some Facebook comments. Oh, but to go back to Jeremy and HB's debate. So, and this is, I think, between them, but I'll mention it. I don't think that football suffers any declining popularity at all. I don't think there's any declining popularity with football, really at any level. I do think, though, that in terms of the gigantic revenue that football generates from its media rights deals, and you really have to say media rights and not TV. It used to be the TV deal, but you don't really say TV deal anymore because in the case of the NFL, a lot of this is not traditional TV anymore. It really is appropriate to say media rights deal now. I do think, as popular as football is, there could be a little bit of a bubble with the media rights stuff. Because what we think of as traditional TV, ABC, CBS, Fox, NBC, and some of us are old enough to remember there wasn't a Fox, but ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox, like traditional TV type stuff and all their, cable subsidiaries. That business is hanging on by a string. It's just hanging on by, and it's probably, if you read the trade papers, I think they'll say it's actually starting to deteriorate a little faster than they even thought it was going to. That it's been deteriorating for a while, cord cutters and whatnot, but it's actually deteriorating even faster now. Well, the thing that is propping up football, that's the wrong way to say it. The thing that is generating the most revenue for football right now is traditional TV. And it's easy to understand why. If you look at the 100 most watched television programs, once again, when I say TV, I'm talking about, the old school idea of television, not video content, but the old school idea of television. Like the 100 most watched TV shows in a given year, literally about 99 of them will be NFL games of some variety, 90 something at least. So it's easy to understand why. I mean, the only relevance that traditional television has is through football. And so therefore you'd pay almost whatever to keep football, because if you don't have football, you don't exist. Like, what would CBS even be without the National Football League? What would NBC? NBC has the most watched television program in America. Sunday Night Football in America is the most watched television show in America. What if they didn't have that? What would NBC even be anymore? What is it if it doesn't have the NFL? So because of that, they'll pay anything. And the NFL knows it. I don't know if y'all saw this the other day. NFL came out and said, I forget what they're looking to get like 50% more media rights money on their next deal. And it's basically like pay it or else. And maybe they get it. But you also see this thing where, like, a lot of the leagues, Major League Baseball, NFL, they've almost propped up ESPN a little bit, because they also know that while, ESPN could just go away, we don't really want them to, because they pay us a lot of money. Because I think the sports leagues know they benefit from traditional television. But what happens when that goes away? What happens, and one day it's going, unless something really weird happens, the trend, we'll get to a point where the TV like existed when I was a kid does not exist anymore. And it's only going to be what we now call streamers who are making the bids on this. Well, in a non-television world, does football still generate the same revenue? It very well might, but I am a little curious about that. That football has made, I'm talking about college and pro, has made a ton of money off a industry that may not exist forever. And I'd be at least a little curious about that. Edwina and folks talking about the crazy weather day. What a wild weather day this is. Marshall Fleming says the way college football is now with the transfer portal, and some teams have 50 to 60 new players, it's almost impossible to know if some teams are going to be great or average or horrible until the season starts. This is where the math people are really interesting. And this is one of the things that's really hard to understand. But the math people will say it's true. And I've studied enough of it to think, yeah, it might actually be true. Or at least directionally accurate. What the math people will tell you is, even with new players, and we in college football, we always get, even pre-transfer portal, we have a cycle of new players every 4 years, that a 5-year average for a team in terms of its overall performance is still pretty predictive. Now, how could that be true over the course of 5 years? That's two completely different rosters from year 1 to year 5. How could that be true? There is just a positional value that, think about all the different kinds of quarterbacks that Georgia's had. You've had a guy like Carson Beck, super hyped. You had a guy like, say, Gunnar Stockton before this past season, not exactly incredibly hyped, at least not nationally. You had a guy like Stetson Bennett, who nobody believed in. You had a guy like JT Daniels, who everybody believed in. And you've had various things in between. All different types of personalities, different types of, expectations. And yet if you put every Georgia quarterback, certainly this decade, Kirby Smart era, if you put them all in a line, their performances actually look pretty similar. They're all right there around 30 touchdowns, 20-something touchdowns. The stat line for a Georgia quarterback is actually pretty consistent time over time, even though the players at the position are wildly different in terms of their personalities, in terms of what people expected from them. There is a positional value that Georgia seems to achieve, no matter who its quarterback is, how different he might seem from previous quarterbacks. That's a small example of a larger point. That now you have drastic counterexamples, like say Indiana, of course, which to this day I don't think anyone's ever properly explained. But broadly speaking, the math people will tell you that there are program traits and there is positional value. 25 years from now, you can make a reasonable prediction about how many home runs the center fielder for the New York Yankees is going to have. There's a chance that 25 years from now, the New York Yankees center fielder is not even born yet. Probably isn't. But we have a pretty good idea of what that stat line is going to look like because there's a long-standing history of New York Yankees center fielders. And that's just a really weird thing that even with new rosters, the actual performance doesn't change all that much. Garrison Tucker asked about Eric Morris at Oklahoma State. So this is the guy that came from North Texas, right? So this is an interesting thing. You're hearing a lot of buzz about this. It's a really good question, Garrison, because and I don't know a ton about the guy, and if I get any of these facts wrong, correct me. But what he's doing at Oklahoma State is the Curt Cignetti model, right? Like he's bringing North Texas to Oklahoma State. You're like, well, why would that be any better than it was North Texas? I don't know, but it certainly worked for Indiana. We're seeing a couple of examples of that this year where, like, the entirety of the Iowa State roster is playing for Penn State now. So Morris going to Oklahoma State is bringing a lot of North Texas flavor with him, and there are a lot of people who think they may be dramatically improved because of it. It's worth watching. Campbell, as I said, Matt Campbell doing some of that at Penn State too. Worth paying attention to. So I won't pretend to be an expert on Morris nor what he was doing at North Texas, but a lot of people are talking about this strategy. And honestly, I probably like Gundy more than some people do, but Mike Gundy was underperforming at the end for Oklahoma State. So it's probably not that hard to get the train back on the tracks, given the fact that it was probably worse than it should have been. Let's see what else. Wild Man Slayer with some interesting numbers in here as it relates to is this the size of the fan base? Where'd you get this from, Wild Man? That's pretty interesting. So he mentions Georgia's got the second most with 3.1 million. Alabama's got 3.4 million. That's, if I said how many true fans does Georgia and Alabama have, I would have said 2 million. 3 seems like a lot. I would have maybe said more like 2 million for both, but it's not way far off from what I was thinking. But I guess I was undershooting it a little bit, but I knew it was in the millions. I would have said more like 2 than 3, but that's pretty interesting. That's pretty interesting. Pretty interesting. Brian Whitaker says this has probably been the best year for the World Baseball Classic. It's been really good, really good. People like playing for their countries. They just do. It's one of those things that that seems to work. It works in hockey. It works in baseball. I don't follow soccer, but the World Cup's always really fun. It's always good. Lee Burrows says Team Italy isn't being watched in Italy. Yeah, but some of this is a little bit made up because like the Italian team is just a bunch of American major leaguers with Italian sounding names. It's like Jack Caglione. It's like the former Florida Gator playing for Team Italy. I don't know how Italian the Italian team actually is, but it's still fun. Still fun. Matt Rukavina. So I made a very obscure joke at the end of today's show. Gatorade Updater being 1955. I said I should put on some Brooklyn Dodgers gear in honor of the Brooklyn Dodgers winning the 1955 World Series. That is a very obscure joke that almost nobody got, that I probably shouldn't have even said. But yeah, Matt says, as a Houston fan and obviously Braves fans, Astros and Braves fans united, and there'll be no Dodgers gear worn around here. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Oh, let's do a couple more. We got to go. But it's a very good point, Matt. It was also, I wondered if anybody would have even gotten why I said that had I not explained it. Every now and then, just the most obscure thing will just come floating out of your mouth that you didn't really plan on saying. That was an example of that.
I got it, but it was very obscure.
Yeah, it was a very, very obscure reference. For whatever reason, I've always been fascinated by the old Brooklyn Dodgers a little bit. That era of baseball in New York is really interesting. Dodgers were very interesting.
I always associate the borough of Brooklyn with like sepia tone, Dodgers, Ebbets Field, and apparently Brooklyn could not be farther from that vision where it's very hipster.
Yeah, it is now for sure. Yeah, it is now for sure. For sure. Yeah, very much so. But all these, like, I think the reason why I'm interested in the Brooklyn Dodgers is because a lot of content has been produced by them. Read a bunch of books. I mean, like, there's just a lot of stuff out there. I'm talking about old books, newish books. A lot was written on those teams. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why I got interested in it. I also have, on a bat, I have, like one of these days, I'm going to go live on Whatnot. I'm just going to show you all my stuff. But I have all this weird, obscure memorabilia, like nothing that's really worth that much. I have a bunch of very weird memorabilia. And on a bat, I have autographed Johnny Podres, 1955 World Series MVP. That also may be one of the reasons why I've always been interested in the Dodgers, because I do have the Johnny Podres autograph, who won the World Series MVP. And when I met him and got him to sign it, I did get him to to put the transcription there. Let's see what else. Oh, Garrison Tucker says Oklahoma fans talking about revenge for 2017. Honestly, for whatever reason, I just have kind of dropped the ball on this. We have not done a lot of Georgia schedule talk yet. The Georgia and now I'm going to save most of it until after the spring, because now spring practice here. The Georgia schedule is really interesting. It's a pretty interesting schedule, and I do think Oklahoma coming to Athens is a really big deal. I really do. It's a gigantic deal, because honestly, the January 1st, 2018, Georgia-Oklahoma, one of the great games that's been played for Georgia Rose Bowl history. I'm guessing Oklahoma would say, not fond memories of it, but a thrilling game. That's a big rematch. It is a big rematch. It is a big rematch. And you know what? In Pasadena for that game, Oklahoma fans got my respect. They really did. I thought they showed up, supported their team. I've said this before. A lot of people don't understand this, but culturally, I think Oklahoma is a good fit for the SEC. Texas, I do not. Oklahoma, I do. Oklahoma feels SEC to me. Texas does not, nor will it ever. But Oklahoma is fine. I have no problem with Oklahoma being in the SEC. Texas, I will never quite accept. Matt Rukavine also says Oklahoma is hot right now in recruiting, too. Currently has the number one class. That is interesting. Randy Hall says, in my opinion, who's the greatest hitter ever? I have to defer to my grandfather on this. I was lucky my grandfather instilled a lot of sports knowledge in me. My grandfather always raved about Ted Williams. So out of respect for him in this answer, I always say Ted Williams. I actually met Ted Williams one time too, just briefly, very briefly. but, signing autographs. When I was a kid, we got my grandfather's brother a ball signed by Ted Williams. But I remember, Splendid Splendor. You just see him there. Some, gym somewhere in Metro Atlanta back in this would have been the 80s, late 80s, I guess. Late 80s. Really fun. Stick D's wants to see the videos. So the best stuff is probably on like an awful announcing or something like that. If you go on Twitter and look at their thing, they had some of the best stuff. Like Georgia baseball has got it, but I don't know that Georgia baseball posted what the best part, and we're not going to show it to you just because, unlike some, we do try to respect that kind of thing. The spiking of the bat and, that's the best part. And I don't know that Georgia baseball has that. Let me see if I can do this real quick. This is never going to go as fast as I want it to. But awful announcing had it. Georgia baseball may have it now. Let's see if they do. Let's see if they do. So if you go on their feed, Georgia baseball. So they've got good video of the catch. And they've got okay, so they do have a pretty good video now. It's from 11 hours ago they actually do have a good video because I hadn't really seen this. So they got the catch from Cole. They've got the reaction of the player on the other side when he realizes it's not going out. They got a great video of the celebration. And keep in mind, there's some fan video stuff out there that shows there you go. Okay, so Georgia baseball's got a good video up right now. 11 hours ago, the caption on Twitter says, "Nothing wrong with a little bedlam before bedtime." And it's slow motion of Lawless realizing that he made a fool of himself. Great celebration by Georgia. So that's the best. That's probably the best one right there. 11 hours ago, Georgia baseball. Caption says, "Nothing wrong with a little bedlam." It shows the bike spat, or I should say let me try to say that again in English. The bat spike, I mean to say. And it also shows the reaction when he realized, oh no, that ball's not actually going out of the ballpark. It's caught for out 3. That's a very good video. All right, final comments, and then we are going to go because it is late. Anything else? Tony Huff says you got to give the Hammer some love. Yeah, I mean, Henry Aaron, one of the all-time great players, too. Pure hitter. I mean, obviously, he's got the what I would view as the home run record. But, boy, the old-timers, man, they loved Ted Williams. And when we talk about, like, comparing eras. Listen, I'm telling you right now, I don't care any, like, modern player. You say, better athlete. I mean, Ted Williams is also a fighter pilot, too, now. He's both, he's athlete, Hall of Fame level athlete, and he's like Maverick from Top Gun in the same body. So if anybody's going to translate over eras, I got no problem saying Ted Williams is going to do it. Jonathan Aaron says Pete Rose. Yeah, and I know he's the hit king, but Rose is not in the category of a Ted Williams. And I realize 4,000 whatever hits, and he should have been in the Hall of Fame far before, that conversation was reignited, but not in the same category. Not in the same category of Ted Williams. Brian Whitaker says, can you put the bracket info back up? I missed it. Can we do that one more time before we go for Brian and others? It's our Golden Shoe Bracket Challenge. Super simple. All you got to do, and I'll give just send me your name, your mailing address, your email, your phone number to brandon.adams@dawgnation.com. Just send me that, and when you send it to me, I will then send the link back to you. So it is a specific link just for us. just for fun among us. We had a couple hundred people that did this last year. I'd love to get 300 this year. That'd be really fun, just because it's just, it's a very different bracket contest when you're competing with a large number of people. A lot of people at work have the feeling of, well, I'm competing against 9 people. I'm competing against 10 people. But the truth is, in a situation like that, just pick the chalkiest bracket. You're going to probably have a very good chance of winning. But with like a couple of, this is why people, I think, like the Golden Shoe Bracket Challenges. Not because of anything we do, because we don't do enough. But what people like about it is if you're in a bracket that has, maybe this year it's 300 people. I think the last year we had 200. Let's say it's 300 this year. It's a completely different bracket strategy. It's totally different that if you pick the chalkiest bracket, you're probably not going to win. Now, statistically, you're unlikely to win no matter what, because it's several hundred people. But I think one of the things that people do like about it is that strategically, you can't approach it in the most mundane, boring way, because, you are statistically unlikely to win a large bracket pool. So therefore, a bracket like this does reward a little bit of cavalier behavior, although, ultimately you got to get the picks right to do so. So just send it to me, brandon.adams@dawgnation.com. This is not a Dawg Nation sanctioned event. This is not for cash. This is just for fun. But we've done it now the last couple of years, and even though we've broken 1,000 promises related to this, people still seem to like it, which is actually pretty amazing. So look forward to your participation. Always happy to have you on that. And our friends at R.S. Andrews. Now, speaking of brackets, there's no telling how many brackets Dari's in. I bet he's got Calcuttas and, survivor pools and every bracket you can do. Dari just feels like the kind of guy that have a million of those. He's also great at taking care of you. Now, this is one of those days where it's like air conditioning the weekend. It's the heat back on by tonight. So as you're toggling back and forth, be thankful for R.S. Andrews, because they keep those systems, heating and air, working the way they're supposed to, getting new life out of those old units, keeping everything tuned up to factory fresh specs. Find R.S. Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for a lot more on that. All right. Sounds like Christy's got some sleeting up there in LJ, so it's here, strange as it is. Y'all have a good day. We'll see you back tomorrow, DawgNation Daily, and our R.S. Andrews cool down when it's all said and done. Here tomorrow. We'll look forward to talking to you then, everybody.